The military records list him as Frank Castle, a decorated Marine Corps captain, an exemplar of duty and courage. But the city of New York knows him by a single terrifying epithet, the Punisher. To understand the monster, one must first find the man, a man buried beneath layers of armor, rage, and the relentless echo of a single catastrophic afternoon. Frank Castle's life was a study in paradox, even before the breaking point. He was a devoted husband to Mary, a doting father to his two children, Lisa and Frank Jr. Yet beneath the suburban normalcy, the veteran was already at war. The jungles and deserts he had served in had left their insidious residue, a hyper-vigilance, an emotional flatness, a quiet terror that he kept neatly packaged away from his family.
He
tried to be normal. He failed. The words he read to his daughter from storybooks often blurred with military jargon. The gentle rhythm of civilian life felt like a foreign, dangerous silence.
Yeah, it really is.
The Central Park massacre was not the cause of his PTSD. It was the final, devastating symptom. It was a sun-drenched day, the kind of perfect New York afternoon that promises peace. A family outing, ice cream melting on the concrete, an innocent sound of children's laughter. Then the laughter stopped. It was a crossfire, a vicious, unscheduled collision between two rival crime families, a brutal spat over territory and pride. Frank was there. He saw the flash, he heard the roar, and he moved with the swift, lethal precision of a trained predator. But this was not war. This was chaos. And Frank, the ultimate soldier, the man trained to save, was rendered utterly impotent. He lived. His wife and children did not. He survived the bullet wounds, only to face a more profound existential injury. The true collapse came not at the park, but in the sterile, air-conditioned silence of the courtroom. The killers, a handful of low-level thugs and key figures of the Costa crime family, were either acquitted due to insufficient evidence, witnesses disappeared, or released on technicalities. The system, the very framework Frank had fought to defend,
We have
failed
to
him.
mention the precedent.
It was a
from the
betrayal
previous
more
case before the
agonizing than the
recess.
bullets.
Are you
That
sure the
ruling,
judge will
that
allow
bureaucratic
it?
shrug of indifference to the spilled blood of innocence, was the final severance. In that moment, Frank did not just mourn his family, he mourned his faith in humanity, in law, in order. He looked at the judge, the lawyers, the system, and saw not justice, but a terminal disease that needed radical excision. The war was not over.
The
It had
charge
merely
is
been
dismissed.
redefined.
You
He
are
did not seek
acquitted.
vengeance in the traditional sense. He sought balance. He sought an accounting. The name Frank Castle was officially pronounced dead, a victim of the same violence that took his family. But in the shadows of the city's underbelly, a new entity was born, an entity driven by a singular, chilling purpose to ensure that for every life unjustly taken, a proportional, violent debt was paid in kind. He was preparing his uniform, sharpening his instruments. The time for law was over. The time for the ledger had begun. The transition from decorated Marine captain to relentless killer was not a sudden explosion of madness, but a meticulous, calculated re-enlistment. Frank Castle did not become unhinged. He became disciplined in a new, terrifying way. He had failed to protect his family by adhering to the laws of man, so he adopted a new, unwavering law, the absolute certainty of lethal justice. His lair, deep within the forgotten infrastructure of New York, a disused subway station, a crumbling warehouse, was his new command post. It was Spartan, organized, and smelled perpetually of gun oil and stale coffee. There were no photographs, no sentimental trinkets. Frank Castle had purged his environment, just as he intended to purge the city. The only symbol was the skull emblem painted crudely onto his tactical vest. It was not a sign of intimidation for his enemies. It was a psychological tool, a uniform to erase the man who had loved and lost. When he wore the skull, he ceased to be Frank. He became the Punisher. His early operations were focused, surgical strikes against the Costa family, the perpetrators of the Park massacre. These were not emotional outbursts. They were acts of military necessity. He tracked them, studied their routines, and eliminated them with the cold precision of a highly trained assassin. His victims didn't just die, they were executed, often in ways that mirrored their own cruelties, a form of poetic, albeit brutal, justice that served to mentally balance his internal ledger. The absence of emotion was the most frightening aspect of his methodology. When he interrogated a low-level drug dealer, twisting the man's arm until the bone ground against itself, Frank's voice remained low, even. "You sold poison to children," he stated, not as an accusation, but as a verifiable fact. The pain was merely a tool, a necessary function to extract the required debt. There was no pleasure in the violence, only a profound, numbing emptiness. This detachment was his shield against the overwhelming guilt of surviving. Yet the trauma always found cracks in the armor. One rain-slicked night, while staking out a gambling den, the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the metal roof triggered a sudden, agonizing memory. The sound of a plastic ball hitting the roof of his car during a summer road trip. Frank's hands began to shake violently. He dropped his rifle scope. He pressed his knuckles into his eye sockets, desperately trying to keep the visions of his laughing daughter at bay. He had to remind himself, this is the war. This is the mission. The emotional memory was a luxury he could no longer afford. The Punisher's war quickly escalated beyond mere personal vendetta. He saw the Costa family as a symptom, not the disease. The disease was the rot of the entire system, the corrupt police, the complicit politicians, the judges who looked away. His targets became larger, his methods more extreme.
Who are you working
He moved
for?
beyond small
Don't lie
arms
to
to
me.
military-grade explosives, beyond street corners to federal buildings. He was using the tools of war on his own soil, an echo of his past that he could never truly escape. The line between protecting the innocent and becoming a relentless, dangerous weapon had completely dissolved. Frank Castle was gone. The ledger of blood demanded payment, and the Punisher was ready to collect. The fire had been contained, the sirens faded to a low thrum. Frank Castle stood alone on the rooftop, his chest plate streaked with blood and soot, the skull emblem glaring out into the neon haze of the city. He had neutralized the threat, saved the dozen girls held captive, and left behind a graveyard of those who preyed on the weak. Yet, as the adrenaline subsided, the victory was hollow. He did not feel the triumph of a hero, nor the satisfaction of a killer. He felt only the oppressive silence, a silence that immediately allowed the insistent, nagging whispers of his past to rush back in. The silence was the enemy. It was in the silence that he remembered the smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with gunpowder, the last scent of his family. Back in his makeshift fortress, Frank stripped off the heavy tactical gear. He was meticulous, cleaning every weapon, restocking every magazine, a repetitive, obsessive ritual that kept the chaos of his mind at bay. It was a psychological necessity. If the gear was clean, if the inventory was perfect, then perhaps his purpose, his twisted sense of justice, was also perfect. He moved to a corner and pulled out an old, beat-up answering machine. He pressed the play button, and the static cleared, replaced by a soft, warm voice. "Frank, honey, it's Mary. Just calling to say we love you. Lisa says tell Daddy she ate all her broccoli. Come home soon." Frank listened, his eyes fixated on the cracked glass of the machine. He was not seeking comfort. He was seeking validation for the immense self-inflicted pain he endured. He needed to hear her voice to justify the carnage he had caused. He needed to remember the perfection he lost to continue punishing the imperfect world. He whispered to the recorder, a private confession. "Mary, I can't stop. I remember the laughter more when the world is quiet. I have to make it loud again." His war was not against crime, it was against the silence of his own loss. The Punisher understood his own ultimate fate. He knew he was a killer, a criminal, a living weapon that would one day be destroyed by the very system he abhorred, or by a superior, equally violent force. But he also understood his role. He was the dark mirror held up to society, reflecting the failures of its laws and the depth of its decay. He was the necessary extreme,
Hey,
the awful
me.
consequence of a
Listen
broken
closely,
social
we don't have
contract.
much time left.
He
They're
looked into
coming.
the shattered reflection of a mirror hanging near the doorway.
Frank,
He saw the
honey,
aging
it's
face,
Mary.
the battle scars,
Just calling
the
to say
empty
we love you.
eyes.
Lisa
But
says tell Daddy
superimposed
she ate
over
all
his
her broccoli.
reflection
Come home
was
soon.
the white skull. Frank Castle had not brought justice to New York. He had merely replaced one form of chaos with another, more calculated form. His ledger was endless, a debt that could never be fully repaid because the debt was owed to his own soul. When a man dedicated to defending the law sees the law fail so profoundly, does he become a victim of circumstances or a willing perpetrator of a new, darker order? Is the Punisher a necessary evil, or simply the eternal bleeding wound of a city that cannot heal itself?